Have you ever noticed how often narrow door religion turns into velvet ropes and bouncers? Lots of talk about who gets in later, while real people are kept out now. You strip away the afterlife scoreboard and you start to see a simpler question. Are we widening the circle of dignity here on earth? Or are we guarding a narrow gate that people with a selfish agenda have created? Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C, we'll explore how Isaiah's big tent vision challenges gatekeeping, how hardship can teach without needing a cosmic reason, and how fairness is something we build, not just something we feel. In this episode, we're asking an honest question. What happens if we drop the fear-based filters and focus on the values underneath? Things like our shared humanity, resilient learning, and widening the narrow doors that restrict everyday life. Because if faith is going to be a force for good, it should look a lot less like sorting souls and more like opening paths for people to thrive. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. Now, what that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people with their own agendas and different audiences. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C. Our first reading is from the prophet Isaiah. It's chapter 66, verses 18 through 21. Our second reading is from the letter to the Hebrews. It's chapter 12, verses 5 through 7, and verses 11 through 13. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 13, verses 22 through 30. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. So with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from Isaiah. Thus says the Lord, and I, because of what they have planned and done, am about to come and gather the people of all nations and languages, and they will come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and I will send some of those who survive to the nations, to Tarshish, to the Libyans and Lydians, famous as archers, to Tubal and Greece, and to the distant islands that have not heard of my fame or seen my glory. They will proclaim my glory among the nations, and they will bring all your people from all the nations to my holy mountain in Jerusalem as an offering to the Lord, on horses, in chariots and wagons, and on mules and camels, says the Lord. They will bring them as the Israelites bring their grain offerings to the temple of the Lord in ceremonial clean vessels, and I will select some of them also to be priests and Levites, says the Lord. Our second reading is from the letter to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, and have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. And our gospel reading is from Luke. Jesus went through the towns and villages, teaching as he made his way to Jerusalem. Someone asked him, "Lord, are only a few people going to be saved?" He said to them, "Make every effort to enter through the narrow door, because many, I tell you, will try to enter and will not be able to. Once the owner of the house gets up and closes the door, you will stand outside knocking and pleading, 'Sir, open the door for us.' But he will answer, 'I don't know you or where you come from.' Then you will say, 'We ate and drank with you, and you taught in our streets.' But he will reply, 'I don't know you or where you come from. Away from me, all you evildoers.' There will be weeping there and gnashing of teeth when you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, but you yourselves thrown out. People will come from east and west and north and south and will take their places at the feast in the kingdom of God. Indeed, there are those who are last who will be first, and first who will be last." All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from Isaiah. And if you peel back the supernatural framing, Isaiah's sweeping vision is simple and radical. The circle is supposed to include everyone. Yes, it's hard to get past the arrogant God who claims that everyone will be brought to worship him, but let's try. What the reading was talking about was the old promise about blessing all nations, which reads more like a human project, not a divine quota. Build communities where no person's worth depends on their tribe, status, passport, creed. In plain language, the point isn't who's chosen. The point is that human dignity is meant to be universal. That's a beautiful ideal. And it's where religious institutions often stumble. So many churches preach all are welcome, but then carve out lists of exceptions, belief tests, identity tests, purity tests. Even the more progressive corners rarely mean everyone when they say all are welcome. A secular humanist reading of this pushes back. Membership in the human family is the only credential that matters. If you're Homo sapiens, you're in the circle. So how do we live this out without churchy halo talk? Well, how about we start small and concrete? Let's design policies and build relationships that default to inclusion, not exclusion. In fact, this reading seems to imply that we should focus on the people who are most likely to be judged or shut out. Bringing everyone together, as the reading says, implies that we should trade gatekeeping for hospitality. And while we're at it, we should trade hollow slogans for measurable fairness. Isaiah's vision becomes a civic blueprint. More chairs at the table and fewer barriers at the door. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that all humans are special. At its best, this passage nudges us from an exclusionary position to one of shared humanity. If the promise is for all, then our job is to make all real. In hiring processes and in housing screening, in the pews and in our classrooms and our families, our friend groups. We can keep the poetry if we want, but the practice is what counts. widen the circle of care and acceptance until no one has to earn their humanity. All human beings are special. Our second reading was from the letter to the Hebrews. And this passage seems a lot different if we understand the word discipline in its original Greek, paideia, meaning education, training, formation, rather than just as punishment, which is how too many Christians understand the word discipline. Through that lens, paideia as education, right, hardship isn't a cosmic spanking. It's just the messy classroom of real life. Growth comes from practice, from feedback, and then correction. Building habits, setting boundaries, and learning skills that make us steadier next time. The payoff that this reading points to, right, a harvest of peace, looks less like blind endurance and more like the calm that follows learned competence. That doesn't mean pain is divinely assigned or morally deserved. A lot of the suffering people experience just comes from randomness, bad luck, exploitative systems, or other people's choices. So let's drop the blame game. Let's stop thinking, God sent this, or you must have deserved it. The humanist approach is to ask, what's the lesson here? And what harm can we prevent going forward? Not all struggle is redemptive, so let's not romanticize pain. Instead, let's refuse to be cruel. Let's fix what's fixable, and then let's refuse to blame victims or some God in the sky whenever bad things happen. Now, the closing imagery of this reading, strengthen your weak knees, make straight paths, is very practical. Shape your environment so that what you learn sticks. After you've gone through a hard time, try to translate that hardship into insight, then turn that insight into action. Depending on the situation, get yourself some coaching or a good therapist. Adjust your workload. Learn a skill you may have lacked. Ask for help sooner. Rest on purpose. If there are patterns of behavior that keep hurting you, change them. Look, if you have the energy to constantly complain about how bad things are, then you have the energy to change your situation. You just need to stop bitching and start redirecting that energy to something positive. The discipline discussed in this reading should be seen as education. But education isn't passive. It's practice, repeated until the lessons we've learned are just second nature. Anyway, the main lesson I got from our second reading is that our hardships can be educational. Read this way, the passage invites resilient learning, not pious resignation. We don't have to explain suffering to learn from it. We can convert experience into better habits, healthier systems, and even kinder communities. What we need to do is refuse preventable harm. We need to seek help sooner, and then turn every lesson into care for yourself and others. Our hardships can be educational. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And this reading is famously murky. Ask 5 Christians what the narrow door means and you'll get 7 answers. That ambiguity has often been used to soothe insiders and scare outsiders. It turns salvation into a scarcity contest with spiritual bouncers at the door. Read as myth, though, it's naming a human truth we can actually work with. In the real world, doors are narrow because people make them narrow through rules, gatekeepers, and systems that decide who counts and who gets in and who doesn't. So let's drop the whole afterlife merit testing thing and treat the narrow door as a design problem. Here's the way we see the narrow door in the real world. Here's how it shows up. Admission cutoffs, hiring hoops, housing screens, voting barriers, immigration rules. These are the thresholds that shape who gets in. If the last will be first is going to mean anything here and now, it points to widening those doors on purpose. Clear, fair criteria, fewer arbitrary hoops, universal design, due process for everyone, and maybe something like a bias audit on the policies that are quietly locking people out. No holiness punch card required, just transparent, humane rules that don't confuse privilege with merit. Fairness, then, isn't a feeling. It's something we build. Now, personally, it looks like questioning our own preferences, sharing access, and refusing to play along with exclusionary norms that we tend to just ignore. In organizations, it means publishing standards, opening pathways, paying living wages, and measuring outcomes by who's actually getting through the door. Civically, right, in our broader society, it's things like protecting the vote, expanding legal aid, and rejecting policies that win applause by shrinking the circle of care. When we meet a narrow doorway, we don't worship the doorman. We fix the doorway. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we must strive for fairness because life isn't inherently fair. But taken this way, the text isn't a riddle about who makes the cut in heaven. It's a challenge about how we treat each other on earth. Life doesn't distribute chances fairly, so communities must, by design, do the work of widening thresholds and resisting gatekeeping that masquerades as virtue. If we want more people to flourish, we have to build for that. We have to measure it, improve it, and defend it. We must strive for fairness because life isn't inherently fair. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Isaiah, the main lesson I came away with was all human beings are special. In our second reading from Hebrews, the main lesson I got was our hardships can be educational. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was we must strive for fairness because life isn't inherently fair. What if we stopped auditioning for an unprovable afterlife and poured that energy into making this life decent for everybody? The thread through these readings is simple. Every person counts, struggle can teach us how to care better, and fairness isn't a feeling. It's something we build. So let's widen the circle of acceptance and care on purpose. These readings can help us see that we need to design policies and communities where nobody has to earn their humanity. We need to learn from our most difficult times and turn those lessons into practical help. And we need to fix the narrow doorways, those rules and habits that quietly keep people out. If faith means anything, let it show up as groceries on a doorstep, reasonable rent, a living wage, a seat at the table, a vote that counts. We don't need heaven to justify dignity. We simply need the courage to demand that everyone gets it. Let's spend less time sorting souls and more time reshaping our systems so more of us can live free and thrive. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what and now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because freedom means no one else's theology gets to run your life. When belief becomes a control system, Think Christian nationalism or conservative playbooks like Project 2025. Real people lose their rights, their options, and their safety. Keep your faith if you want. Just don't legislate it onto everyone else. Public policy should protect pluralism and equal protection. Period. That's not anti-religion. That's pro-freedom. This is important because fairness isn't a feeling. Right? It's, like I said, it's something we need to build and defend. Narrow doors are the rules and habits that quietly shut people out. Voting barriers, predatory screening in housing, inaccessible services, crazy amounts of hiring hoops. We fix that by widening thresholds on purpose. Right? Giving transparent criteria, ensuring due process, focusing on universal design, guaranteeing a living wage, and then measuring who actually gets through. If a rule shrinks the circle of who's accepted, then we need to rewrite the rule. We should care about this because hardship isn't part of some cosmic lesson plan, but we can learn from it anyway. Bad things don't always have a reason, and there's no logical proof for believing that they're part of some grand cosmic plan. So we need to avoid preventable harm. We need to get help sooner, and we need to learn how to turn our pain into practical action. We need to learn skills, how to set boundaries, offer mutual aid, get therapy, build better policies. Those things that can help us overcome the aftermath of our personal tragedies, or that can help prevent others from experiencing the same sort of tragedy in their lives. Those things, we should work to ensure that those things are available to everyone. That approach beats the hell out of the everything happens for a reason shrug, and it also beats self-pity, which traps you and exhausts everyone around you. Yes, you need to grieve fully when certain tragedies occur, but then learn from your hardships and translate what you've learned into action. This is important because we need to swap wallowing in self-pity for solidarity. Self-pity narrows our vision. Solidarity widens it. Focusing our energy on learning from our hardships and tragedies is an excellent way to keep from wallowing in self-pity. Oh, woe is me doesn't do anything except keep us trapped in a cycle of suffering that we are enabling. Stop. Yes, we need to work through our grief and sorrow after a tragedy, but wallowing in self-pity and sorrow for too long isn't good for us, and it puts a ridiculous amount of strain on those around us. Self-pity blinds us to the pain of others who experienced the hardship or tragedy with us, so it becomes selfish and self-centered. The messages from these readings tell us, you know what, we need to suck it up, be an adult, process our pain or grief, and then learn something so that we can help ourselves and others. Then go out and help make this world more fair for everyone. Widen those narrow doors. Pick one local way to expand someone's freedom without harming others. Show up at a meeting. Fund legal aid. Drive a neighbor. File an accessibility request. Volunteer a shift or work the phones on a hotline. Right? Whatever it is, put a date on it and bring an ally. Day by day, week by week, that's how we widen those narrow doors and make this life more fair for more people. All right, the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, instead of looking for a cosmic reason behind pain, we should turn grief and hardship into agency. The goal this week is simple. Move one step from self-pity toward solidarity with others by naming one thing your tragedy taught you and putting that lesson to work for yourself and someone else. All right, so with that in mind, here's your question/challenge for the week. What is one clear lesson you can draw from a specific personal tragedy? And what 2 concrete actions will you schedule this week to apply that lesson? One action needs to be for your own well-being, and one needs to be about helping someone else. All right? So look at a personal tragedy. What are 2 concrete actions that you can take to apply the lesson you've learned? One for yourself, one for someone else to help others. Give yourself a deadline. When will you do it? And then figure out who you'll do it with. Bring an ally. That makes it easier. Answering this question/challenge, it matters because it shifts you from dwelling on the past to repairing your life and preparing for the future. Actually, writing down a lesson in 2 scheduled actions gives your pain a job to do. It builds a boundary, starts a habit or a support you didn't have before. And then it forces you to extend care to another person who's maybe walking a similar road. When people hear personal tragedy, they tend to think of death or a devastating medical diagnosis. But hardship really does come in all sizes, and the smaller stuff can pile up until it knocks the wind out of you. If we don't face it and learn from it, the emotional debt compounds, and we end up hurting ourselves and the people closest to us. Back in the early 2000s, I was in formation to become a Catholic deacon. It was going well until I reported our pastor for sexual harassment. Shortly after that, the bishop decided my formation would be indefinitely delayed because I wasn't spiritually ready. At the time, that was a gut punch. When a transfer opportunity came up at work, my wife and I took it. We moved from Michigan to El Paso, bought a great house at the top of our price range because I'd been promised a promotion, and then I watched that promotion get handed to someone else as a favor between executives. Month after month, there was more month at the end of the money, and we had to use credit cards to fill the gap. Now, those hits added up. Right? Rejected by a church for doing the right thing. Sidelined by a company I'd served loyally for over a decade. Struggling to provide for my family while still believing you need to stick with one employer for 30 years and retire with a gold watch. I just quietly slid into self-pity. Yeah, I tried to maintain a positive face for my family, but I was angry, I was exhausted, telling myself the story that fate was out to get me or that maybe God was punishing me. It took a couple years to break that cycle. The shift came when I realized I was spending more energy complaining than changing anything. If I had the energy to constantly rehash how unfair it all was, I certainly had the energy to take action. So I made a new plan. I'd update the resume, apply for jobs all over the country, work with a recruiter, right? Take the calls, do the interviews, keep going. It took 9 months of steady effort before an offer finally came through. Now the catch? Well, that was in 2009 in the shadow of the housing crash, and the job was across the country. But this time, I refused to sink back into, oh, why me? I decided to figure out what was in my control and just do that very, very well. I really put myself into the new role. And at the same time, we did everything we could to sell our home in El Paso and find a new one in Virginia. For 9 months, I lived apart from my wife and our 2 boys. I missed so many fun, ordinary moments that I'll never get back. And there were days I felt overwhelmed. Nights I stared at the ceiling, doing the math in my head, wondering if we could make it work. But we kept taking the next step, and the next, and the next. And eventually, all the pieces fell into place. Since then, there have been other setbacks, some big, some small, but I face them differently than I did before. I still grieve when I need to. I still get scared. I still get stressed and anxious. But I remember the lesson. If you don't like your situation, figure out what you can change and start changing it. Translate pain into a plan, knowledge, skills, action, and then helping others. Because here's the part I didn't expect. Once I got better at handling my own difficult times, I had more capacity to help other people with theirs. That created a virtuous cycle. Serving others energized me. That energy made it easier to keep going at home and at work. And the habit of learn, act, help, that kept me from sliding back into complete self-pity. Now, to be perfectly clear, I don't believe everything happens for a reason. But I do believe we can gain wisdom from anything that happens. By learning the lesson, taking the next honest step, and using what we've gained to widen the door for someone else. That's kind of the heart of this week's challenge. Take one hard chapter in your life, pull out one clear lesson, and put it on your calendar in the form of 2 actions, one that strengthens you and one that helps a neighbor. That's how we turn hurt into help. That's how we turn intention into real change. Keep it practical. Right? Name the tragedy, state the lesson in one sentence, pick a date and time, invite an ally, and decide how you'll know it worked. Right? I made the call, I attended the meeting, I delivered the meal, whatever. This isn't about pretending the loss was meant to be. It's about refusing preventable harm. It's about getting help sooner and widening those narrow doors a little, starting with your own life. Put it on the calendar, text your ally tonight, and check in next week with what you learned. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. Austrian neurologist and psychologist Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." This quote is like a compact manifesto for human agency. If you've listened to me for any length of time, then you've heard me talk about agency before. Human agency is simply the capacity of individuals to make choices and take actions that shape their own lives and help shape the world around them. So think about human agency when you hear this quote. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. It doesn't deny pain or pretend circumstances are always fair. It insists that even when our choices are constrained, we still possess at least a sliver of control. That space is where we refuse fatalistic thinking. Oh, my life sucks and it'll always suck. No, enough. That space between stimulus and response is where we don't accept the script that's being handed to us. It's where we decide who we're going to be next. It's not blame. Right? He did this or she did that or everybody's out to get me. It's dignity. It's recognizing and accepting that your mind isn't just a mirror of what happens to you. That recognition is the beginning of recovery, of resilience, and the beginning of moral courage. The importance of that idea shows up in everyday biology as much as in philosophy. When something hits us, loss, fear, anger, the body, the physical body, wants a fast, protective reaction. But the space between stimulus and response, between what happens and that action, is that brief moment when we buy just a little bit of time for the wiser part of our brain to come online. So our values, not just our reflexes, take the wheel. Practiced over time, that space turns into a skill. Name what's happening, remember what matters, and then choose the next correct move. That's how growth happens in real life. Not by erasing hard feelings or ignoring life's difficulties, but by letting them inform our choices rather than letting them dictate those choices. And freedom? Frankl is pointing to more than personal, private serenity. Choosing our response is also how we keep our various communities more humane. In that shared space, we can slow the rush to punish. We can ask who's harmed and who benefits from this. And we can act in ways that widen, not shrink, all the narrow doorways that have become barriers to human dignity. The difference between retaliation and repair, between acting outraged and taking principled action, lives right there, in the space between stimulus and response. Guard that space. Cultivate it and use it well, because that's where we turn pain into purpose. And it's where we let our values drive positive change. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question/challenge for the week. But also pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that we need to process our pain or grief and then learn something so that we can help ourselves and others. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the occasional video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite. It feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with The Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.